Welcome to the Army and Battle section of my Beastmen guide. In this section, we will be going over the entire Beastmen roster, covering all of the units' pros and cons, as well as compositions and formations for battle. If you want to jump around the different sections, then there are timestamps in the description and the pinned comment. Disclaimer. This guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Now, the Beastmen roster is frustrating. They are genuinely quite strong in battle, and when it comes to the rush playstyle, they are really one of the best factions. They have fast moving monsters and monstrous infantry, meaning they can roll over armies before they even know what's hit them. Unfortunately, if you don't like the rush playstyle, then you are out of luck, because it is the only playstyle they can effectively perform in battle without you being sorely handicapped. This is really a problem to do with the size of their roster, which is tiny in comparison to other armies. Some factions you can't even get all the units in a large army, but with this one, you barely have enough to fill a 20 stack. Somehow, even with this tiny selection of units, they managed to get quite a few viable monsters for different stages of the campaign. They have good choices for early game backlines harassment, as well as later game frontline demolishers. Unfortunately, one area where the roster does get neglected is the range department. There are literally 3 ranged units in the entire roster, which is a little sad, but to be honest, probably on brand for the beastie lads. Still, it makes me sad and restricts their playstyle even more. Now, let's get into the units. First of all, we have the melee infantry starting with the Ungold Raiders. They are the bog standard Beastmen infantry, and if you've ever seen an early game infantry before, you're seeing nothing new here. In fact, they are a little weaker than your average early game infantry in most aspects, but one area where they do shine is by being just a touch faster. This might not seem like much, but given the rushing style of the battle, it really does come in useful for keeping the momentum going. That being said, they are still in dire need of assistance in almost every scenario, so make sure to keep some monsters, missiles and magic, oh my, handy to lend a hand. The use case for these guys is a meat shield to allow your other units to do the damage, so don't be concerned with them taking a few casualties. As long as your damage dealers are okay, that's all that matters. These guys also have 2 other variations, Spearman and Shielded Spearman. The Spearmen are the same, but have some very slight bonus versus large and charge defense, which makes them very slightly better at absorbing enemy cav without instantly breaking. This doesn't mean they are cav killers by any means, but they are a slightly better option when you are trying to defend your flanks. The shields are the exact same as spears, but have shields, which means a little more defense from melee and ranged. I was taking 4 regular Ungors alongside 2 shielded spears to make a meaty front line for my early game. Next up, we have the Gore Hood, which are kind of like the Ungor, but without the Un. They are essentially larger and better in almost every way, so can be used pretty much the same way. You want them to be the big meat of your front lines to keep your large units safe. As I mentioned, they are better than Ungors in every way, but by the time in the game you unlock them, they aren't really any better off than Ungors were at their stage in the game. This means you play exactly the same, which is good for consistency, but not the best for making you feel like you're making progress. They can take on anything that's weaker than them though, so if by some miracle you manage to overtake a faction in technical advancements, then you can sleep well knowing your infantry that cost more are better. They also have another variation, shields. Taking shields, shockingly, makes them take shields, which grants them more defense both from a range and in melee. Aside from this, they play pretty much exactly the same, so I of course took shields whenever I could, and I was taking between 4 and 6 of them to replace either the center or the entirety of my front lines. Our final melee infantry is the Gore Hood. Name this because they are the best of the Gore units. To be honest, they really are the best units, but only by default. Instead of being goat men with sticks, they are actually armored and bring real weapons too. They deal decent amounts of armor-piercing damage, and while it isn't enough to make them stand up against greatswords, they are still pretty decent against mid-game infantry by themselves. Of course, as is tradition with the Beastmen, they perform best when being backed up by some large monster units to do the damage while they take the brunt of the enemy damage. I of course took 6 of these lads with me as my endgame front line, not that I had much of a choice. It does feel bad that they are the one infantry unit that isn't total chod, and they are still reduced to being a meat shield for your big boys, but hey, I suppose that's life when you're playing as the worst faction in the game. Now we come to the one and only ranged infantry unit, and I wish I was joking. The Ungold Raiders are basically the Ungold Herd, but with some crappy bows and arrows. Their damage is pretty pitiful as to be expected, but it's still a shame given they are the only units in this category. The only reason I don't consider these guys to be totally useless is their maneuverability. Not only are they pretty speedy for infantry, they also have Stalk and Vanguard deployment, so can stand a hidden location and stay that way right up until they are ready to fire. This makes them great for firing into the enemy back from a hidden location, which makes for a nice little sneak attack. Of course, this doesn't change the damage they do, which is pitiful, but it did mean they were worth taking for a short while at least. I took between 4 and 6 of them with me in my very early game armies, but they did not stay for long. Now we come to the Cav units, starting and ending with the Centaurs, burning through these categories. The Centaurs are a weird unit since they are literally a halfway point between Cav and infantry. This makes them into more of a sustained combat Cav unit since they lack any massive charge bonus. That being said, you only want to leave them versus something you know they can beat, otherwise they'll get bogged down and taken out pretty damn quickly. So undefended ranged units and the juicy ass of the enemy front lines already in combat are great targets for them, but anything that's a little more feisty, they should probably give it a miss. As with most units, the real strength comes from the speed these guys have, which lets them dip in and out of combat with relative ease, so just stay aware and keep them on the move when needed. They also come with 2 other variations, great weapons and throwing axes. Great weapons grant them more armor-piercing damage at the cost of a little defense and the shields. They still want to be used in these same scenarios since the increase in damage is offset by their weaker defense, meaning they will perform relatively similarly to the base unit. They will of course perform better versus armored units, but anything that's armored also comes with some big boy damage normally, so be very careful not to let them get surrounded. The throwing axes totally change how the unit works since they change into a Marauder Horseman type unit. This means they should be used pretty much exactly like that, and that means sticking them on skirmish mode, sending them to get behind the enemy lines to fire into their undefended backs. The missiles deal armor-piercing damage, so you want to focus your fire on anything elite and armored on the enemy force to get the most out of them. If they manage to run out of ammo, then they will perform similar to the base unit in melee, which means they can cause some chaos in the back lines and the backs of the front lines. I would say taking 2 to 4 of some melee and ranged Centaurs works well in an earlier game army since they do offer some unique ranged value as well as being a reasonable substitute for Cav. Now we come to the one chariot unit of the faction, the Razer Got Chariot. As most of you will be aware, I am not the best with chariots, so take everything I say here with a huge grain of salt. As with all chariots, you want to keep momentum up with these guys and keep them weaving in and out of combat to make the most of that charge bonus. If you keep them doing this, then they really can do massive amounts of damage to infantry, even if it is heavily armored. Their aforementioned charge bonus alongside their armor-piercing weapon strength means you really can tear through enemy units with relative ease. Of course, this ease is only really easy if you can micro effectively, and speaking for myself, I can't. If you can, then I would say taking 2 to 4 of these lads will do well for some micro-heavy but rewarding charging units. Now we come to the final category, beasts and monsters. We're starting with the Chaos Warhounds. Now these guys have been in a couple of previous guides by now, but I still don't think I'm over how much I actually really like them. They are honestly one of the most underrated units if you ask me, for 2 very specific reasons. First of all, they are super duper fast so can get around into the enemy backs and tear their ranged units to bits before the enemy can do anything to stop you. They don't do the most damage in the world, so more often than not you need to send them in 2-on-1 to make sure they can take on what they're going against. Even then, if they get caught by anything that's stronger than weaker ranged infantry, they will not do well, so make sure to choose your targets carefully. Now the second thing that makes them so damn good is what they do to retreating units. Send them against something already running away, and not only can they keep up with their great speed, but they will literally eat the unit in seconds until there is nothing left. On top of this, they also come in another variation, poison. Poison Warhounds are pretty much exactly the same, but have poison attacks, which just make everything better if you ask me. It means that whatever they attack becomes weaker in both attack and defense, which means you can just have a much easier time taking them out, which is never a bad thing. Of course, you want to upgrade to these guys as soon as you can because they are just flat out better. I would take 2 to 4 of the regular hounds before upgrading to these guys because nothing chases down units better. Now we come to the Razer Got Chariot. They're kind of like a slower, fatter version of the Warhounds, which means they come with beefier damage but slower speed, which in my opinion takes away a lot of the value of the Hounds type of unit. They aren't really my type unit, but I could for sure see them doing the same job as Warhounds, just in a slightly different way. They do more damage, which means they can take on units 1-on-1 and help out on the front lines a lot more. You just have to keep a close eye on them to make sure they have enough time to get away if the enemy starts to collapse on them. Another thing to look out for is their Rampage, which will come into effect if they start taking too much damage and lose leadership. They will attack whatever enemy is nearest, and more often than not just go in far too deep and get themselves killed. Personally, I prefer Warhounds, but if I was going to take them, I would again say 2 to 4 of them would do the job just fine. Oh, Harpies. We've never really got on, have we? I don't know exactly what it is about Harpies, but I don't like them. I really don't. As units, they are kind of like Fellbats, but with large hitboxes, which makes the major weakness of flying units even more crippling. I think their lore gimmick is picking at the leftovers of battle, so it makes sense they aren't exactly incredible versus most units more elite than basic archers or corpses. They technically do this job just fine, but I've just gushed about other units that do the same job arguably better. The only thing I see Harpies having over Warhounds is the fact that they are flying so it can go right over the heads of the enemy front lines rather than having to go around, but personally that isn't really enough for me to prefer them. If I was going to take them, then it'd be the same numbers as Warhounds with 2 to 4 of them to go out in pairs to blitz the back lines. Now we get into the bigger boys, starting with the Chaos Spawn. All 5 of my Warriors of Chaos fans will know about these guys, but if you by any chance haven't, then let me break it down. They are massive balls of chaotic corruption and are great for embedding into your front lines to dish out some massive damage with their large swinging attacks. They do huge damage with poison attacks, meaning they will make anything they are going against weaker, which means an easier job for both them and your other units. On top of this, they are also unbreakable, so will stay there till the job is done or they are totally wiped out, which means they will deal a whole bunch of damage right up until the last man, or tumor-ridden monster in this case. I love taking these guys with me for my front lines monster backup, and I was taking 4 of them pretty much the entire campaign. Now we come to the Minotaurs or Minotaurs, which are the perhaps poster child for the Beastmen, and for good reason. They are similar in size to Chaos Spawn, but are far superior at combat, especially once you start implementing that hit and run playstyle I keep going on about. Minotaurs are fast and brutal, which means they can get into the enemy backlines and tear them to pieces in seconds before circling back to smash the front lines into a fine dust. They aren't quite as fast as something like the Warhounds, so are susceptible to getting caught out by Cav. And depending on the Cav, this can be a bit of an issue, but keep an eye on them and keep them in groups and they'll do serious work for you. Now, as with most units of this size, their main weakness is ranged fire, so you want to make sure you have them protected as much as you can using infantry, and of course by shutting down these ranged units as quickly as you can. Minotaurs also come in 2 other variations, shields and great weapons. Shields, unsurprisingly, gives them shields, which grants them increased defense from ranged as well as in melee, with a very slight sacrifice to damage. They essentially perform the exact same, so I personally take these guys over the base unit, since keeping them alive more lets them do more damage in the long run. Great weapons are again similar to the base unit, but are given giant great weapons. These grant them increased armor piercing damage, as well as a bonus versus large, meaning any Cav that tries to take them down will be given a serious run for their money. Any large units like Cav or other monsters are great targets for these guys, but if there is nothing like that, then they will still do a great job versus regular infantry, so don't be afraid to send them in. I like to take 3 of these and 3 of the shields variant for a good mix of infantry and large focusing units. Next we have the Giants, and there is really nothing to say other than, please don't take it. Giants in general suck ass because they are big and slow, which means that the weakest ranged units in the game can take them out with ease if given enough time. The only time I would ever say taking Giants is acceptable is when you're going against an enemy army that has 0 ranged units, and even then, they will struggle to do anything worthwhile since they will get outran by pretty much anything. Please, never ever ever take them and take the next unit instead. The Cygor is bigger, better, faster, stronger, and any other word that means it's better than the Giant. Not only does it do a buttload of damage in melee, but it also tosses massive projectiles that do insane damage from range. These lads are what you get if you combine Tom Brady with a giant cow, because they can sling these bad boys with excellent precision and deal huge damage to enemies from a massive range. They are best targeted versus clumps, but with this much damage, it doesn't really matter. If they ever run out of ammo or get charged down, then they do great damage in melee, so there is really no downside and no reason to ever take a giant. I took 2 of these with me as soon as I can because they are essentially the Beastmen Necrovex. Now we come to the Regiments of Renown. I'll go over each unit, what it's a unit of, and the differences between it and the base unit of the same rank. The Destroyers of Drakwild are a shielded Ungold Spearman herd unit and gain 9 melee attack and poison attacks. Blackhorn's Ravagers are a shielded Gore Hood unit and gain 20 armor, stalk, and the Rowdy augment. Korok's Manrippers are a Bestigor's herd unit and gain halberd weapons, which grants them plus 11 melee strength, as well as charge defense and bonus damage versus large, at the cost of 7 melee attack and 12 charge bonus. Sons of Goros are a great weapons Centaur's unit and gain 35 armor, magic attacks, and guardian. The Butchers of Kalkengard are a Minotaur shields unit and gain regeneration and the ability to cause terror. Finally, we have the Eye of Morslieb, which is a Cygor unit and gains 29 missile strength and magical attacks, both from melee and ranged, as well as the Warp Gaze Hex. Now we come to my ideal balanced composition for the endgame. I take 6 Bestigors for my front line because they are the only front line that doesn't suck all the ass. I take 3 Minotaurs with shields and 3 great weapons for plenty of infantry and anti-large damage, 2 Cygors for artillery firepower, 4 Chaos Spawn to back up and beef up the front lines, and my armies are led by a Beast Lord, not that I have any choice, and a caster. Now to see how this army performs in battle, I'll hand you over to Miles. Take it away. Thanks for that, Miles. So, as you can see, obviously, playing the Beastmen, we're going to do a bit of a rush tactic. We're playing in the Shadow Woods, which is one of the the subterranean Beastmen battles. It's actually a quest battle for quite a number of factions, funnily enough. But we are, of course, playing as the Beastmen, and we are, of course, going against the Empire, because the Empire, well, first of all, the Empire in general is one of the most, well, versatile factions in the game, so going against them gives you a good idea of how you're going to do going against pretty much anyone. And also, if you look over to the enemy lord here, it's none other than Taurus Bodbringer himself, who is, of course, the opposite of the Beastmen. He was added with the Beastmen DLC to the Empire, and is kind of their big rival. Of course, we can't actually place him yet, but hopefully with a Beastmen DLC, hopefully on the horizon, I'll be able to place him quite soon. So, obviously, moving up my Minotaurs up the left here to hide in these woods so that I can get them round to flank into the enemies. Moving my front lines up, of course. The enemy has a bunch of Hellstorm rocket batteries. Life is pain, taking some hits to the best scores, but you know what? It's not the end of the world. Luminarch of Heish there, sniping quite a number of units. Got quite a few best scores and a Chaos Bomb, which is very upsetting. At least he isn't focusing my Cygors, because as we all know, Cygors are the best. So now the enemy is moving up his gun lines, strangely enough. A couple of great swords. He's got about 6 of them, I believe. So I'm just going to start to move my units up to form a line here with the Chaos Spawn right behind them. Luminarchs of Heish also have moved up and getting some beautiful shots into my units there. Just because it's on my own units doesn't mean I can't admire it. As you can see on the left here, just slow things down. Moving in my Minotaurs, great weapons. A couple of units to take on these Demogryph Knights. Of course, Demogryph Knights are very, very good cav. So I don't want them to completely roll over my Minotaurs. What a Superman dive by this guy over here. Great job, sir. And sticks a landing. Yes, he does. Fantastic damage. And looks great doing it. This looks hilarious. Goddamn. Never seen this in slow motion before. So yeah, sending them in with their bonus versus large. They should tear them up just fine. You know, they've got 110 weapon damage. Of course, Demogryph Knights 58 each. So they will still take some hits, but not too many, especially with 2 of them. Of course, they have been backed up by some range units. So moving my Minotaurs with shields around here. In fact, the rest of my Minotaurs around here to start getting into the backs of the enemy line, start shutting down all of those valuable ranged units. Moving my Cygors into range, they are throwing at the other units of Demogryph Knights, which, to be honest, if I had the halberds, I'd probably send them over here for that bonus versus large. But nevertheless, focusing them down because they are quite the threat, and then focusing my other Cygor just into the general pile of greatswords here. Sending my Beast Lord in also against the Demogryph Knights, the one and only choice when playing as the Beastmen for your Lord. My Bray Shaman's sat around just a little bit. I do use him, I promise. This is kind of the stage in the battle where I'm getting all my guys ready. So I have a big old clump of Best Gauls and Chaos Spawn in the middle here against this unit of Great Swords. These guys went far too forwards. I really should have backed them up with more Chaos Spawn, but you know what you're going to do. The Demogryph Knight halberds instantly breaking and instantly shattering to there off the field. That's beautiful news. Moving these units around now to start surrounding the backs of the enemy front lines. Minotaurs kind of stood around because, you know, I'm terrible at micromanaging. But on the right side, they are taking on those Demogryph Knights and a unit of Great Swords with relative ease. A fantastic cast. The chain lightning over there, by the way. I didn't mention it before, but goddamn, it hits so many units. How many kills does that pick up? Only 18, but the damage done, it's a lot. Okay, we'll see that at the end, but it is definitely a lot of damage done. Now, the net of Amnitok coming out on my best Gore Hood, which is quite unfortunate. They're just getting ripped to pieces by all these enemy range units, which is never what you want to see, really. The Great Swords, 3 units of them in here, along with Taurus Bodbringer, of course, the man himself. But I've also got my Beast Lord in, and we're doing a little cast of... I actually can't remember any of the names of the Wilds spell, but it's the big explosion one, and it did a little bit of damage to the Great Swords. It's not the best lore when you're going against armor, but it certainly does the job. Using the Cygor Summon, which is the entire reason why the lore is pretty decent, and I'm going to move him around here to shoot into these sides of the Great Swords. My other 2 Cygors are kind of in inopportune positions, I would say. Where is my other one, actually? Oh, it's right there. They're trying to hit these Great Swords, should probably move them up and around, but you know, you live and learn. These guys coming back just before they reached in the field, so I'm going to, of course, send them back into this main clump, since that's where all the action is happening. On the left over here, we have a unit of Chaos Spawn, which are totally alone, so these couple of units of Best Scores that have come back, I'm definitely going to send them in there. And we've got a big rock. Where is that headed to? But it looks like it's headed towards the archers, which are already been taken on by the Minotaurs with great weapons. Of course, during all this, moved in the rest of my Minotaurs. There's a couple sat over here, still finishing off the last of those Great Swords. But the rest of them have gone into the back lines. The Hellstorm rocket batteries, they are no more. I'm, of course, going to move back in to take on the Hellblaster volley gun, some Chaos Spawn, and now taking on the Templehof Luminarch, which is the Regiments of Renown Luminarch of Heish, which is a massive amount of damage. But in melee, it's really not the best, so those guys should be doing pretty well. Now we see that I have 3 units of Minotaurs heading in to take on the Hellblaster volley guns, so they will be shut down in no time, and the rest of the range units are now being shut down by the rest of the Minotaurs, which were over here finishing off those Great Swords. One last shot from this Luminarch of Heish. The Best Gauls now making it into combat to assist the Chaos Spawn against these 2 units of Great Swords, the Caster and the Luminarch. Of course, a massive explosion spell there, doing a bunch of damage, even if it didn't pick up too many kills. 17, not too bad. Not too bad for a Caster, especially a Caster that doesn't have a lot of armor-piercing damage. As you can see, a lot of the enemy units are breaking at once. We have 2 units of great swords breaking here, 2 units over here which are looking very low. Of course, one of those is the Caribou great swords, so they will never break, but it's looking very dire for the enemy team. Of course, I have a bunch of Minotaurs stood around doing nothing, but it doesn't matter. Managed to take enough of them out that we get army losses, outnumber them a bunch of troops to 1, and the last thing to do is, of course, take out the Caribou great swords, as it always is in these example battles, because the enemy always gets them. So yes, of course, since it's a rush strategy, it does require a little bit of micro. You know, you just need to constantly moving units up. Like these Minotaurs over here, I should definitely been, you know, moving them around quicker, getting them to the range units quicker. I could have taken probably half the casualties I did on the front lines here. I should have managed it better, got the chaos spawn in, but, you know, we take the W, and I'm happy with that. Cygor summon, of course, always useful. I got 66 kills, and it's a summon. It only costs like, I mean, it costs quite a lot of wins of magic, don't get me wrong, but it's a summon. It's an extra unit you can bring you on the battlefield, possibly multiple times if you have enough magic. I mean, of course, it does die, but, you know, still got 66 kills before it died. Just going to fast forward through this, and I will see you at the stats. Here we are. So, Pyrrhic victory. Maybe we only lost... Okay, we lost, like, over half the army. So, yes, as I said, probably could have lost a lot less than that. But if you look at it, most of the casualties were on my Bestigors. Like, over half missing from all of them is probably where all those casualties are. Whereas on the Minotaurs, like, probably didn't lose any of them. Didn't lose... Maybe lost one of them. None of them. None of them. None of them. None of them. Neither of my Cygors. Couple of Chaos Spawn. But, you know, that's not really that bad. These are all the frontlines units, and these units that you want to be doing all the work. And looking at it, you can see that's kind of the case. Of course, the Bestigors, since they are elite infantry, did actually do quite a bit of damage. So, you know, 37, 42, 67, 16, not the best. But, you know, around 30 or 40 kills average between all those guys, which is definitely very admirable for frontline whose sole purpose is to just stand in the way to let other units do damage. As you can see, the Chaos Spawn, 56 kills on those guys, 37 there. The 4, I believe they were probably the ones attacking the Luminarch of Hysh. So, you know, they were kind of focusing most of their damage on, you know, just killing something that is a single entity. But for the damage value, not too bad. Right, here we see, right, the damage value there. So they've got 37 kills, but only 360. 500, 300, 300, 300. Oh, 900. Oh, very good, very good. What the hell will they find that they got 900 value from 39 kills? But as you can see in the Chaos Spawn, so that's 600 there, nearly 600 there, 400 there, and look, 1,000 there, so that was definitely the Luminarch of Hysh. The Beast Lord, I mean, it was kind of in, it was just kind of in the middle of all the infantry, so it did a little bit of damage, but again, it was all against infantry, so nothing too crazy. I'd have thought that'd be a lot higher. It seems to do a lot of damage to the Great Swords, but again, I suppose it is the infantry, so not too much value, but definitely assisted with a lot of damage. Now, moving on to the Minotaurs, 1,000 damage there. Very, very nice. I'm guessing that those are the ones that were attacking the enemy artillery, so I'm guessing I'll see something similar here. Ooh, 1,500 damage value. Yes, those were definitely the ones that were attacking the enemy artillery. Got tons of value there, and probably finishing off those ranged units as well. 100 kills on these guys, so they were probably attacking the ranged units right from the outset, so they got a lot more kills, but not as much value. Now, for the great weapons, these guys were attacking the Demogryph Knights, so there we go, 1,300 there, 900 there, and 1,700 damage there. Less kills than this guy, but basically triple the value. So definitely pick your tags with these guys, because anti-large damage does make a difference. And of course, finally the Cygors, chuck in loads of rocks into those clumps. So, you know, about 1,000 damage then, 1,300 damage there. Very, very good. Very, very pleased with that. So yes, lessons learned. Manage your Minotaurs a lot better than I did, and you probably won't lose all of these units. And if you get a lot of Pyrrhic victories, it doesn't really matter, because the units that died are kind of the units that are there to die. So yes, that's all from me. Back to you, Miles, to close you out. That concludes this section of the guide on the Beastmen armies. Next time, I'll cover the Lords and Heroes and what they can do for you both in the campaign and on the battlefield. Thank you for watching this section of my Beastmen guide. If you want to check out the other parts, then there is a link in the description for a playlist to the series. Don't forget to join the Discord so you can stay up to date with everything happening on the channel and vote in all the polls. There is a link in the description to that. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.